December 13th, 2023. Well, yesterday, President Zelensky of Ukraine came to Washington to try to sell some reluctant Republican senators on his request for a $61 billion aid package. But of course, many of these senators actually would be quite willing to vote for that aid package. But the problem that they have is the fact that the Biden administration has been running this insane open borders policy in which people are coming from all over the world claiming asylum when in fact almost none of them are due asylum. None of them are being persecuted to speak of. They're almost all here for economic reasons. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows that the asylum claims are canard to get in the country to skirt our immigration laws. And of course, the purpose of the Democrats doing this is to load up the country for future potential Democrats. And of course, the offspring of these people, they have a good, will be, under the current rules, will be natural born citizens if they're born here. Any young people coming in might eventually get swept into a DACA program. And if the Democrats can end the filibuster and get control like they wanted to not that long ago, like only a year ago, if you will, they were in a position willing to do this, but failed, of course. They would probably just legalize the whole bunch of them. And then they would try to lock in a Democrat majority. And so I guess that plus just the stress that this has been putting on a variety of localities in many states, Texas and Arizona, even Chicago and New York, a lot of the local Democrat leaders are starting to complain about what's going on. So, and the polling has kind of shifted, sort of Ukraine is not that popular anymore. And the fact is the big offensive failed. I think this all adds up to an opportunity, as I mentioned in the previous video, to put some pressure on the Biden administration to, get this. So I think this is why Zelensky is running into some real trouble. And of course, on the House side, there's plenty of people that flat out don't want to provide the aid. I don't think the Republicans alone would be able to pass it. I think that, but with Democrat votes, it would pass fairly easily if it gets brought up. But of course, the Republicans will probably try to prevent it from coming up, and whether or not they can actually do it with a discharge petition or something, I think for the moment that's not in the cards. And of course, so we'll have to see what happens on that. But if you like these videos, please give me a like, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. And of course, anybody else that's interested, you could always forward these to them or a link. So that's kind of the way I see this shaping up at the moment. And a lot of this is because, we are still providing small amounts of aid, but I think the big problem that's coming up is without the big funding, a lot of that money, somebody was saying it almost all comes back here. That's not really true. A lot of the money is actually going to support the Ukraine government to pay the salaries and the pensions and support the literal economy of Ukraine because it's under great stress because of the war. A lot of people have left Ukraine, and certainly young men that try to get out often find themselves rounded up by press gangs and sent to the front. And so, this is, a situation like that. I think that may be the biggest stress is without this financial aid to the system, the internal stability of the regime might become at risk. We are going to be able to provide just give them some of our weapons under some authority that we have, the president has, and effectively we'll reduce our own stockpiles of weapons and ammunition. And some of the stuff is probably not that needed, kind of obsolete equipment or equipment that would outfit a larger military, but things we used back in the 80s and stuff like that. And we've given a lot of Bradley fighting vehicles, for instance, to the Ukrainians because our army is smaller than it used to be. So that's kind of what's going on there. Since we've decided that we don't really want to use cluster artillery rounds anymore. We have a fairly large stockpile of those that I guess we consider disposable, so those are being used. And of course, that's led to Russia using uh, something like 500 kilogram cluster bombs from aircraft in retaliation. So I don't know if it's a net plus, probably getting a lot more people wounded and killed, though, on both sides. And of course, but I mean, those little bomblets that don't go off can be kind of like little anti-personnel mines that either side could step on, whether they're retreating or advancing or whatever. But so, at any rate, that's kind of the situation here. Uh, the Russians are. We haven't discussed that part too much, but the Russians seem to have gone over the offensive now in the last month or two, and they seem to be making slow progress. Like, not everything in this conflict is slow, but it looks like that they're like the Avdiivka offensive, is going slow, sort of like Bakhmut, but it probably is a similar situation. That over time, given enough time, the Russians will probably end up taking it. They are making slow advances. The Ukrainians are fighting pretty hard. There are signs of low morale in some of the Ukrainian units. There's also possibilities that some of that is just, it could be Russian disinformation, using captured Ukrainian troops to make a message. We just don't know on a lot of these things that you can see. But, that's kind of the situation that we're looking at here. And So we can only hope, though, the Republicans hold out, because the ideal outcome would be that we get these border measures. I mean, what we need to do is end this amnesty and go to a remain in Mexico policy, which is what the law specifies anyhow. That the amnesty should be for the people that first come to a country that they need it. I mean, if you're going through Mexico and many people are coming through several countries that are not. At any rate, it's all nonsense anyhow. Very few of these are true political or political or religious refugees. I mean, they're, you can't blame them for wanting a better life. But on the other hand, they may find out they're not really getting the better life they thought they were going to get. They find themselves homeless in the streets in Chicago or New York in the wintertime. But for those particularly come from a more temperate climate. So at any rate, but I think that hopefully the Republicans will hold out. I guess everybody should contact their senators and congressmen people and urge them to hold out on this. Now, some people don't want to make the deal, but I think it's worth doing. I mean, as you know, I'm a critic of the Ukraine war. I mean, of course, it's a complex situation, and there's no absolute right or wrong in it. I mean, some people, generally over here, nobody even really considers what the Russian side of it is. And I will agree the Russians did something pretty crazy when they launched this thing. Obviously, they must have just totally underestimated the reaction that it would get. The biggest mistake I think they made more than anything else was they scared the Europeans. Because otherwise, I think that maybe it wouldn't have gotten to this point. Although now I think the Europeans are losing their fear of it and they're getting tired of the situation it's put them in. So that's the situation on that. However, we have to realize this all got started when the CIA and some globalist type organizations helped facilitate a coup that overthrew a government that was more friendly to the Russians, kind of a neutral government, and got an anti-Russian government in control. And I think that led to Russia then reacting and seizing Crimea, which then led to a situation which festered. And then when Trump got in, it became very easy for the Democrats to try to create this false perception that somehow Putin was somehow manipulating Trump, which was totally false. What was really going on there was that Trump really didn't want to have a conflict develop, and I think that what led to this whole situation also was that when Biden did his chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, the situation spiraled out of control. In that sense, and the Russians probably saw an opportunity, which they probably overestimated. But in the way it's kind of worked out, except it's a lot higher casualty than they thought. I think Putin believed that they would negotiate a deal, which would probably leave them in possession of Crimea under some terms, and would reform some of the anti-Russian policies, where, for instance, there's been attempts to ban the Russian language, and there's a fair amount of persecution of Russians, ethnics in Ukraine, which then led to rebellion, which no doubt was also facilitated by the Russians. And so what's never discussed in these conversations we have right now is the degree to which people from the Donetsk breakaway region are actively fighting right now at Avdiivka against the Ukrainians. So if they were to lose, I guess they could either become refugees into Russia itself and sort of depopulate a lot of that area, or they would become political prisoners of the Kyiv regime afterwards. I mean, nobody's really kind of looking at. There's two sides of this, even inside of the historic or the Ukraine territory. And that territory itself was actually defined by the former Soviet Union. I mean, so obviously there was a Ukrainian ethnicity, but the specific boundaries were set up, by the Soviet Union, which then, of course, fell in 1991. But so this thing is much more complex than we try to play it. So what we seem to hear over here is those that just don't care and want to walk away from it, and those who basically say, let's continue to fight, continue to support them until they actually defeat Russia. But they're very unlikely to actually defeat Russia. And if enough force were applied to really do that, it could have some pretty precarious escalatory possibilities. After all, we are fighting on the Russian border here, or they are. I mean, this is not something that's like in Syria or something where a defeat could be accepted. This is right inside their own territory. And so I think the Russians will probably hang in. I guess a real tell on this will be, does Putin get reelected comfortably come March or not? And I think that will be a real tell to what degree the Russians are behind this and to what degree there really is real opposition. So that's kind of that. I think though that what I still see the idea that I would really hate to see us truly just cut Ukraine off, just completely, if you will, cold turkey and leave them to their fate. After all, to a great extent, the West actually promoted this whole conflict from the outset. Of course, there are plenty of crazy Ukrainians that wanted to go along with it, but on the other hand, I think it needs to be brought to an end through negotiation, and that's why I think that the money should be kind of conditioned on that, but that will probably be impossible politically over here. So, but even with it, I think that maybe things are going so bad that eventually, the casualties are so high on the Ukrainian side given the proportional populations, it looks like maybe something will change. Zelensky is apparently still refusing to schedule elections, which were supposed to happen, I guess, in around the same time the Russian ones were to happen, at least and I guess the people voting would be the people that are clearly behind Ukrainian lines. But that's apparently not going to happen, and there's these ongoing conflicts between him and Zelensky, the chief of staff of the army, and so we don't know how this is going to all play out, but I think that there's a possibility that things will break at some point. It's hard to know. In a lot of ways, I think the situation may be a little bit like World War I, in that Germany eventually was never actually fully defeated in the field. I mean, their troops were still in the field fighting, or when the war ended, but it was more like a collapse on the home front that eventually did it. And I think without this money to pay all the people and their salaries, this may ultimately have an outcome. Anyway, we'll see what happens, but I hope the Republicans hang in there until we get that the border security that we want, and then after that we can, I'm willing to continue the war just in order to get our own security. I mean, it's a horrible thing to look at, but with the current, until there's another government in charge, and I don't know. I mean, for the moment, I would suspect that Trump would make a deal to end the thing. I suspect that DeSantis would too. I suspect that Haley would want to perpetuate the policies we pretty much have now. I don't know what escalatory options she would really prepare to do when she really gets a true assessment from the Department of Defense. That's another issue to consider. Anyhow, I want to wrap this up for now, but that's kind of what I think about the situation. And we will, well, one other thing I would like to mention here, I was, in the last video, I went into the UAP subject and the law outcome. I would like to mention one thing that I've kind of thought of since then, and that is, I think one reason why it came out the way it did, which is basically when you look at what's going to happen, is the idea is to cut off funds for any projects that haven't been properly disclosed to Congress, the appropriate committees that have the clearances in Congress. And it may well be that some of the people finally, that weren't really pushing the UAP Disclosure Act were saying don't really know what to think about this. To them, this is probably a kind of a new subject, one they're not familiar with. They're not familiar with the history of it. They probably tend to think it's all nonsense, maybe. And we generally tend to understand that the intelligence committees even weren't properly brought into this up till now. They've been brought into it by these whistleblowers, but formally, apparently they weren't, or else they wouldn't have needed whistleblowers, right? There wouldn't be any issue about cutting off any money for undisclosed projects if they were disclosed. So I think maybe this is a way to just flesh out so they themselves will be able to get data in Congress before they actually make a policy about disclosure. And maybe that's one thing that kind of eventually held it up. I mean, it's a little bit more on a positive side than a lot of people are looking at, but I think it could be the case. Anyway, again, like I said, they'll be posting this on Rumble as always, and as well as on YouTube, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. Until next time.